Hey, everybody. Welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and this is How to Succeed with Intentional Inclusion with Dr. Nika White. She's right there, and she's the founder of Nika White Consulting. You can find them at nikawhite.com, and she is also the author of the new book, Inclusion Uncomplicated. And I love that. I don't think we need to complicate it too much. So we got three easy questions for her: attitude, behavior, and technique around how to succeed at intentional inclusion. Let's jump into it and get started. Welcome to the podcast, Nika.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be in conversation with you again.
Yeah, and I feel like it's Pride Month. It's a good time to talk about this and highlight all of our DEI issues and different groups. But I love the thought of intentional inclusion. What does that mean? And how would you say maybe that's different from what people commonly think of as just DEI?
Oh, that's a great question. And so, intentional inclusion is when we are really being proactive to recognize that part of helping inclusion to occur has everything to do with us being strategic, for us having this strategic thought leadership around how do we make this happen, right? What is our individual role? And not being passive about it, waiting for someone else to create those inclusive environments. And so, there's a lot of power behind the word intentional, right? It has a certain look and feel about it. It's calibrated, it's calculated. It requires foresight and believing that whatever kind of efforts you're going to exert is going to yield a reward in the end.
I like that. And I do think you have to be intentional about inclusion sometimes because we're all just human beings that we get wrapped up in our own world. And oftentimes, I think this is one of the common misconceptions is it's not intentional that we're excluding people. It's just
Yes.
more of the absent-minded that we're not being intentional about including them. So could you kind of explain the difference for us and maybe include any other common myths or misconceptions you see around inclusion?
Sure. So, again, when I think about being intentional, it's definitely proactive and it requires us to be kind of fully present in the moment to recognize that there is a goal we're trying to accomplish. And we know that in goal setting, 101, we have to make sure that we name it, right? So, if we are in an environment and part of our goal and our interest is to see everyone really excel and show up at their best and contribute at their best, then it should certainly yield thoughts around, well, what can I do to help create this sense of belonging where people feel like they can have full opportunity for success, that they do belong here, that they are valued, seen, heard. And so if we aren't intentional, then to your point, we leave it to our own demise for, the organic ways of inclusion occurring. And inclusion does not just happen organically. We have to make sure that we're being very intentional. And if not, what we tend to do is we have people that feel like outsiders, which means they aren't showing up with their A game to whatever environment. So if we think about the workplace, you have people that are showing up that if they're questioning whether or not they belong, and do I belong here? Am I seen? Am I valued? Am I heard? Then they're probably not really giving their all. And we need to be able to rely on our colleagues to help us from a team perspective, a department perspective, an organizational and society perspective to be at our best. So yeah,
Yeah.
lots of downfalls if we don't consider that.
I want to jump into a little bit of the positives here because I love that word belonging. Because I think when people
Mhm.
hear about DEI, sometimes we think about like it feels restrictive or that we're going to have a different team or
Yeah.
it's going to be uncomfortable. But when I think about the word belonging, I think of stronger, happier employees that are, like you said,
Yes.
engaged with the mission and stuff and feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And I think a lot of corporations make the mistake of using the word family at work and we're a family here and stuff. And they think that they're creating some sort of belonging, but they're not necessarily um, doing that in a way that's engaging for other people. So I think there's kind of a difference for me personally between most companies. I think in 2023 would say they're inviting everybody to the party. They're not excluding everybody,
Mhm.
but when people get there, whether they feel like they belong is a different question. Did
Yeah.
I get that right? And can you help me
You
maybe make
did, you
sense of it more?
did, you did. The way I like to talk about it, Mike, is that belonging is the outcome of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right?
Mm,
It doesn't just happen. It has to happen with very specific, strategic intentionality around combining all of those components. And when people feel a sense of belonging, that means they feel accepted, they feel validated. Imagine just what that does to someone's psyche, to someone's confidence, to someone's ability to perform, because now they have the belief in themselves because others also believe in them. And so it really has found its way into this broader conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the word belonging, for the very reason that you mentioned. People can identify with that. The reality is that the work of DEI is not a zero sum game. And I think that some people feel like in order for
mm,
us to center the needs of those marginalized individuals that have historically been disenfranchised or, left out of opportunities and excluded, that it's going to take something away from maybe the majority or the dominant, population. And that's not the case. Belonging is something that all of us have a need for. And but it is true that when you find yourself as one of those members of a marginalized community and you're underrepresented in that sector, it can feel as though maybe your needs and your lived experiences aren't understood. And with that, it comes, okay, so am I really able to find my way and have full opportunity for success? Because, if you're not understood, then who's supporting me? Who is an advocate for me? So I like to actually talk about belonging in that sense. It's helping us to show up at our best.
I really like that too because I think it's highlighting for me the right side of things. So I wanted to give you a chance of maybe talk about some of the ways companies are messing this up. I feel like there's been a lot of trips this year in DEI,
Mm,
and you can, we don't need to throw anybody in particular under the bus, but
no.
I think sometimes when companies do try to be intentional in this, or sometimes even celebrate these marginal groups, to me it feels like we're still making them feel different, not like they belong. We're highlighting
Yeah.
the differences and not that sameness. Do you
Yeah.
feel that, or do you feel like that's one of the common mistakes? What are some of the common mistakes people make when they're trying to be intentional?
Yeah. Well, what you have described, Mike, is what's referred to as othering. And so, yes, you do want to
Mm,
make sure you are striking the right balance of providing the appropriate support that those marginalized communities need, but not in a way to where you are creating some discomfort for them, right? No one wants to feel othered. And so, what I am seeing in terms of some of the criticism that's out there right now is that a lot of organizations are showing up to this work in a very performative way, right? You mentioned that is Pride Month. It is Pride Month. It's also the month that we recognize and celebrate Juneteenth, which is when the
mm,
freedom for all, Blacks were actually enslaved individuals were really officially recognized. And so I believe that if organizations want to not appear performative, they have to think about not just what am I doing for Pride Month or for Juneteenth or for Black History Month, but what am I doing all throughout the year through my policies, systems, processes to make sure that I am supporting those communities in really meaningful ways. And part of being able to know if you are or not, you have to first and foremost get proximate to the lived experiences of those individuals. We don't know what we don't know, which then also relates to the broader conversation of how well of a job are organizations doing to make sure that they have good representation across many dimensions of diversity within their leadership ranks, right? On their board of directors. That's something that a lot of organizations are not doing quite well. We don't see that level of diversification across all levels of the organization, and that's important. I think also not measuring, your efforts. What you
mm,
measure gets done. Where you hold people accountable, they will deliver. And so, how are you assigning some level of accountability mechanisms and some metrics of success to this body of work? That's another point that I feel like some organizations are missing the mark on. And then just the education and the awareness. We have to realize that there's diversity in how people learn and receive information, what resonates with them. And so we really have to get smarter about about the way in which we are defining our learning and development philosophy as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, right? It is a journey, and people are at different entry points when they first begin to start their journey. And so we have to make sure we're keeping that in mind. It can't be just a singular one and done. It needs to be a strategy, a learning path that provides a continuation of ways in which people can deepen their knowledge and understanding.
That's really good stuff and a really great transition to our behaviors section of the conversation because I just think you nailed a whole bunch of what we can do. But I'm wondering really about, we've talked about really a lot of the goals, plans, and actions, but
Yeah.
maybe you can help us uncomplicate it since that's the name of your new book, Inclusion
Yes.
Uncomplicated. You can go to nikawhite.com if you want to find that, or I'm sure anywhere books are sold. But
Mhm.
uncomplicate this for us. If this is a long-term goal and vision of ours and a value of ourselves and our organization, what are some simple things that we can do order to take steps towards what you just outlined?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is we need to shift our mindset around feeling like this work is too daunting and too complex. Because if we don't, that's going to cause us to have this propensity to continue to sit on the sidelines, right? And see it as someone else's responsibility. That was the whole reason that I felt led to write book number 3, Inclusion Uncomplicated. We wanted to really unravel the knot and center humanity, right? And I think that if we focus on centering humanity, it gives us that motivation to realize that there is a lot of good that can come from being intentional around really engaging in this work in a meaningful way. And so I think that's just it. How do we shift our mindset? How do we see this as something that is work that belongs to each of us and not just the person who carries a title of chief diversity officer, manager, director, leader, even the HR professional, right? Sometimes we'll sit back and we see it as that person's responsibility, but we each have a role to play. And a great way to be in this space is to be an ally. To be an ally to those who are part of those marginalized communities, right? And it's not a label or a title that we assign ourselves, it's a title that we earn from the people in which we're advocating and allying for. So, again, building and cultivating those relationships, getting proximate to the lived experiences and the challenges, and then collaborating on how can I best support you?
I like that, and I'm wondering if you made me think of an idea here, and I have not thought this through at all. So I need your
Okay.
help with this. But in my experience, I think that sometimes, like I brought up earlier, just having those titles sometimes creates a thing in the organization. I actually saw you talk about this on your website where they go,
Mhm.
"Okay, we hired a diversity officer, so they're going to do all the stuff on diversity, and I don't have to." And it kind of creates actually the reverse
Yes.
situation than you were wanting. And I've found success the other way. Actually, when we create programs that build team that are not about diversity, like we're just going to play a game show together, or we're going to make this about sales training,
Mhm.
and we're going to have everybody belong and in a unique situation or go on an offsite, we actually create the bonding and the belonging that we were going to, even if we didn't explicitly say this is a DEI event
I
that we're holding. How do you feel about that? And do you
exactly.
have any tips for really great events
Well, first, I think that we get
or
so caught
programs?
up in what do we call this work? Do we call it diversity? Do we call it equity and inclusion? Do we call it justice? Do we call it belonging? It's gone through so many different nomenclatures. At the end of the day, what's important is not what we call it, it's just doing the work. And so that's part of that mindset shift. Don't worry about what we call it. But yes, it belongs to all of us. It's even how in which we may provide a level of influence around the value set of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, all the things, all the words, right? Within the folks that are in our network, in our circle, or we're demonstrating and modeling and emulating the importance just by our actions of supporting people that are different from us, of building and cultivating relationships with those who are different from us. And how are we building up our cultural competency as well, or our cultural intelligence to learn more about difference, right? Because we can't value it if we don't know it. The unknown is scary for us oftentimes, and that makes it complex.
So let's talk about the how here in our final
Yep.
technique bucket. I would love to hear some of the programs that you think are really successful or any like tips, tricks, hacks, things that we can do to either start conversations, start programs, make a difference. And I think value this in a way that is creating intentional inclusion.
Well, the first thing is that we have to be very intentional about wanting to be on this journey. And what that looks like is doing some education, some individual education, so that leaders within an organization that have the wherewithal and the power to kind of make those decisions that we're going to invest in this work, that they can be advocates and ambassadors for it. And then once we have reached that point, how are organizational leaders then talking to each other about what are those guiding principles that should find its way into how in which we want DEI to be manifested, right? And aligning on those things. And then using that to develop some type of, strategic plan where we have goals and we have metrics and we have accountability mechanisms, getting as many people involved as possible. I love when organizations also rely on the experience of those who are part of maybe an ERG, employee resource group, or it's also referred to as a BRG, business resource groups, because those individuals have the lived experience of members in that population and of that identity. And they can help be a resource around what is the experience like here, the workplace experience for this population, right? Instead of having to guess or even just have it off the radar. I often say nothing about me without me. So who's making all those decisions
Mm.
oftentimes are people that are at the upper level that may not be a group that's well represented of different dimensions of diversity. So are they able to really impact the needs of those who look different from them, if those voices aren't at the table? So again, it's just thinking about all of these ways to integrate it and operationalize DEI into the fabric of the organization, not a singular program or initiative, but it is a way of being, a way of working and operating. And until we can get that into our minds, I think we're always going to be driven by activity and not impact. Activity has a start and an end date. Impact is where we really are able to see sustainable change because we're thinking about systems, policies, procedures. So that's what I would say.
I really like that because that was going to be my next question for you too, as you mentioned measurement earlier. And I feel like if we're measuring activity or hiring quotas and stuff, that we're not measuring the belonging and the feeling, and
We aren't.
there can be misalignment right there. So, what
Yeah.
are some of the ways you measure, and what are some of the ways that we can be thinking about doing measuring the right things or things that matter to make an impact, measuring the impact and not
Yeah.
the activity?
No, it's a great question. I think that it really does depend upon the organizational goals because we can't assume that each organization that is the same place relevant to the broad continuum of DEI work. And so some organizations, their goals may be a bit more loftier because they've been at this work and they've matured in their journey of DEI. But some of the basic things is to look at your workforce, right? Your workforce numbers and demographics. What are your processes by way of hiring and promotion? Look at pay equity across gender, across different demographics, right? And make sure that you are being as equitable as possible. It also relates to how are we identifying who gets the high visible assignments, right? Because that puts you in such a category where you have access to key influencers and leaders, and it tends to play a role in people's upward mobility. And so, how are we making those decisions? Is that equitable? So, really, what I'm speaking of, Mike, is making equity the center of the operations. That is how you're going to be able to really see some traction in this space. And that's a point that I think a lot of organizations will miss. Equity is hard. It can be really tricky, and it does not it's not synonymous with equality, although people will use the two interchangeably. Equality is giving everyone the same thing and expecting everyone to be successful. Equity is giving people what they need and realizing that what they need can look vastly different from one person to the next. But what you're focused on is trying to level the playing field and create opportunities of success for all. We have different starting points, right? And different needs. And so I would say that centering equity is really important for driving towards, having a technique where you're driving towards some of that sustainable change.
And last one here on this topic, and then I want to ask you some questions to get to know you more personally. But since it is Pride Month and Juneteenth,
Mm.
is there a way that you would recommend people start a conversation about this, celebrate these events? Or I'm sure the answer is it depends on where your company is at and the values and
Yeah.
associations of your company. But um, anything that you would recommend just to highlight, for this time of the year?
Yes. Um, Being a resource of information from an organizational perspective is a really great step when you are trying to bring greater awareness to certain um, populations within the workplace, within society in general. So let's take Pride Month, as you mentioned. I think that there's a lot of people who have misinformation about the LGBTQIA plus community, right? So what can the organization do, not just during Pride Month, I want to stress that again, but maybe throughout the year to make sure that they're providing opportunities for people to learn more about that community, their needs, their lived experiences, so that they could become their own individual allies to those communities. And the same for Juneteenth. You know, there are a lot of people who were just hearing about Juneteenth maybe like around 2017, and that is because that's when it officially became a holiday, right? But how many of
Mhm.
us are taking the time to learn for ourselves by doing our own research versus relying on someone else to teach us, right? And so there's the onus of the responsibility of that education is really important for us to make sure at the personal level we are buying into. And then whatever organizations can do to make sure that they're supplementing that learning can be really useful as well. The conversations can be easier if we have already spent some time educating ourselves and becoming aware of really why do we have Pride Month? Why does Juneteenth really exist, right? And so the education piece and the awareness piece is so critically important. Go and support those events, support those communities in whatever way that feels meaningful to them, not to you, but to them, right? So we have to do some research. Ask
Mhm.
some questions. Curiosity can really serve us well during times like, where we're really trying to lean into Pride Month and Juneteenth. Ask those questions, but do your own research as well.
Great tips there again from Dr. Nika White, founder of Nika White Consulting at nikawhite.com. Very easy to remember. Thank you for the branding, Nika.
Yes.
Inclusion Uncomplicated is her third book on the subject. Check that out. It is available now. And there's a books tab on our website there as well. Nika, how do you define success at this point in your career?
Oh, this is such a hard question. I mean, success for me is really about a level of significance and impact. I am one that I want my legacy to be that I made a difference. I feel like this is a space, the DEI space is a space that I was called to, that I was fashioned for, and I want to continue to make my mark in that regard. So that's what success looks like for me. It's just, again, having a level of impact that I can point to that has positively and meaningfully helped a lot of communities and individuals. Yeah.
And I think people are afraid to make mistakes in this topic. So could you
Yeah.
maybe give us a failure you're most proud of, or maybe a hurdle you had to get over in order to be successful in what you're doing?
Yeah, well, so we have to allow ourselves permission to fail forward, right? Because if we aren't failing forward, then we aren't growing, we aren't learning, we aren't becoming better. And so, I have a difference of opinion around mistakes. I think that if you aren't making mistakes, then you aren't growing. And so it's going to find its way into your path if you're someone that's really conscientious about being bold and doing some bold things that can be meaningful. And so, yeah, even as a 20 plus year DEI practitioner, I find myself constantly learning, right? There's
Mhm.
no way that any one individual can have all of the cultural intelligence around the many different cultures and backgrounds, right? And so we all have to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Part of this work is unlearning misinformation. We all are exposed to a lot of information, and maybe we will adopt it as truth until we hear something different that contradicts it. But I think interrogating data as it comes to us and not just accepting it is a really good practice as well that helps us to minimize maybe some of those mistakes that could be harmful to others. Um, and again, just being open to someone correcting us, right? Respectfully kind of
Mhm.
correcting us if they do see some type of misstep that could be creating harm for others. I think that's really, really important because, again, we are going to make mistakes. It's not about if, it's about when. And when we do, we need to apologize, correct ourselves, and move on. And the best apology is change behavior. When we know better, we do
Mhm.
better. So, yeah.
I like that. That was a really great quote right there. But do you have a favorite quote, motto, or mantra that you try to keep in mind?
I do. I've been asked this question actually a few times before, and I always go back to this one quote, which is, "Don't tell me the sky is the limit when there are footsteps on the moon." And that's Paul Brandt. And I love that because I think that it keeps us centered on the ability to keep reaching and to know that if we keep reaching and striving, then yeah, there's so many possibilities that can be created. So, yeah, it's my quote.
Great,
So that's the one that
great
I would put
concept
forth.
to end on. Anything else you want to tell us, or give yourself a free 30-second commercial here about Nika White Consulting and the work that you're doing, or the book,
Oh.
Inclusion Uncomplicated?
Yeah, no, it's very kind of you. So again, I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and we are a full service diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy where we intersect the work of DEI with leadership and business, working with all types of clients, different industries, different sizes, helping them to integrate into their business frameworks DEI. My book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, is available wherever you like to get your books. It is in partnership with Forbes Books, and I really do hope that you will check it out. I would love to be in communication with anyone that has picked up the book and started reading it, and maybe you have some curiosities or just some dialogue you want to have around it.
Well, you nailed that. I'm impressed that I'm the sales trainer here, and you just nailed
Did I
the
get it in
30-second
30 seconds?
commercial on the pitch. So I feel like my job here is done. We'll talk to you next time. NikaWhite.com for more information. If you want to learn how to deliver a 30-second commercial like that, go to Sandler.com, click on the free resources. Lots of great podcasts. Don't forget to share this with somebody that you think needs to hear it. Maybe this is a great way to start a conversation in your organization by just sharing ours here that we had today. So appreciate you making it to the end. For more information, go to Sandler.com. As always, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. See you next time.